Awesome. Welcome to Conversations on Leadership and Administration in Childcare. This is our second to last session. I can't believe that it's happened so fast. And as always, we're going to start with me trying to advance the slide. An acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that I am a settler on these lands now known as British Columbia that were stolen from their original owners. I offer respect to the elders and to the land itself, and I'm committed to actively working towards reconciliation that is just. As someone who works alongside children, I want to offer them the truth of our history so that they may seek justice as they become full citizens of this land we now call Canada. As always, we have these gathering intentions, which maybe aren't as relevant in this particular kind of format, but just to remind folks, come as you are, be yourself, use your voice if you would like to, listen to what's being shared and what is missing, and then let me know what's missing. Notice where you find yourself pausing, being curious, challenge ideas, not people, be willing to unlearn and relearn current thinking, even if you experience some discomfort, and come prepared, having done the work to do the work to grow. So a quick revisit, as always. This is such a practice that I really believe in is just taking a moment to think back, because in this world today, we just like go so fast through everything, staff meetings, even with our teams. I think it's always good to pause and remember what did we do before or what did we agree to. So I hope you've had some opportunities to maybe use the coaching questions or techniques that we talked about last time. Maybe you were able to spot a drama triangle, and you were hopefully able to avoid being the advice monster. I wish I could say a resounding yes to all of those things, but yep, I'm also learning. All right. So tonight we're here to talk about partnerships with families, which is such a good follow-up to our last session on communication and coaching, because we talked a lot about our communication with families. And so this will be a little bit of a deeper dive, because partnering with families confronts issues of power. And we're going to talk a little bit about whose power, when is the power helpful, when is it maybe abused, and how values can maybe help us shift our approach to our partnership with families. So I'm going to start with a quote, because I love a good quote. So I'm going to read this. If your mind is still open enough to question what you are seeing, you tend to look at the world with great care. And out of that watchfulness comes the possibility of seeing something no one else has seen before. You have to be willing to admit that you don't have all the answers. If you think you do, you will never have anything important to say. That is a quote by Paul Auster from The True Tales of American Life. And I use this quote because I think we often come to this topic of working with families, partnering with families, with very entrenched beliefs about roles and practices that often hinder rather than enhance our partnerships. And sometimes we use very entrenched language around that. I think we sometimes use our professional expertise to safeguard ourselves rather than also allowing parents to be the experts on their child. It's a tough line in this quote. You have to be willing to admit that you don't have all the answers. And sometimes we put that pressure on ourselves on this topic, and sometimes we feel the pressure from families. And I want to open some space for us to sit in that tonight and think about ways in which we can manage those entrenched beliefs and practices and maybe think of a new way of being together. As always, this will be posted, and if you're looking to get the quote. So I wanted to start where I almost always start or somehow end up back at, which is values and philosophy. So I think there's three big questions here that, or three considerations we'd like to think about. Um, Consider how you would welcome a family into your center. And the byline of that is, how do you welcome someone into your own home? And that might seem like a bit of a trite question, but let's just sit for a moment and think about that. Do we really welcome people into our centers in the way we would welcome them into our home? How would that change things if we were to make this consideration about welcoming? How would our center have to look? How would people have to feel on being welcomed? The second consideration is, how would you continue to build on that relationship now that you've welcomed this family into your center? It's not enough just to welcome them and have this lovely warm arrival and then for that to drop off. And that's where a lot of us fail, is that we work so hard on the welcome and then we forget about all the days that follow. And so there's lots of different ways, and we're going to share a few, and I've already shared a few in past presentations about how you can continue to build the relationship. One of these ideas here is primary contacts. Some centers use this. I don't personally, but I did experience it as a parent, where a particular educator in every room is primarily responsible for a small group of parents or children. And so they become the primary contact for that family. And so if that family is looking for a more in-depth conversation or some more assistance or needs to communicate something more personal, they would look to do that with their primary contact. I think in infant and toddler care, this is often very helpful. However, it begs the question, what happens when your primary contact is away? And how do we make sure that the whole team can care for this child and their family when the primary contact is away? So I think there's some real benefits and opportunities with primary contacts, especially around communication with infants and toddlers. Obviously, our pedagogical documentation, the way we share with families what is happening whilst they are not with their child, when their child is with us, is a very powerful way to give parents a visibility into the work that is happening when their children are with us. It also helps them to see us as the professionals we are, as the intellectual people we are, um, as the people who have made child development the center of a lot of their thinking. And I think that is something we don't often think enough about with documentation. I think often we think it's for planning or for sharing with the family. And this is where, we have to move beyond just telling a cute story. Because what we can do here is level up the playing field a little so that parents don't see us in a only caring role, but see us in a role that has consequence for their child's development and learning. And I think often educators feel less than families, particularly when, they maybe know the profession or the economic status of the people they're working with. And documentation is a way to really help parents and families see just who we are as leaders, as pedagogical people who are doing important work with their child. And then also gatherings. And we'll talk a little bit more about gatherings in a little while. But obviously, the more we can put ourselves into opportunities where we can be alongside families in a less formal way or in a less pressured way, then pick up or drop off. Because those are usually not moments in which the child, the parent, and sometimes even us are actually at our best. They're rushed, they're busy, they're sometimes a bit emotionally fraught. And so trying to carve out some time where we can be in better relationship with each other is important. And then the third consideration is how our family is reflected in our environment. Um, and I think there's always been best practice about, making sure families' cultures or families, um, ethnicities were reflected. But I've had a long conversation over many years in our organization about how we do this part better. How do we make it more home-like? Do we have children and families photos in frames, on a ledge in the classroom that as you might in your home or up on the wall, but in frames, not just laminated and stuck up. In what ways can we really make it so that a family feels they're entering a space in which they are well represented? And that actually also includes our educators. So when you walk into one of our centers, there's like an IKEA Expedit, which is used for storage. But on the top, there's this nice tablecloth, and there's a whole bunch of family photos of all of our staff that are in that particular center. Are there with a couple of tchotchkes, somebody's brought in something that means something to them. And we've taken to really using our bookshelves as a place where we'll put some books and then a frame of a family, and a few more books and then a frame of a family, or just wherever we can within the center to really make sure that families feel seen. There's lots of other ways. You all probably know them. We have, family photos for our babies. They are laminated, they're in a basket. They can take their family with them if they're feeling sad. Sometimes they take that little photo to nap with them. We do all we can to make families feel as at home as possible. One of the things that we've really had to think about is a lot of centers gatekeep literally parents at the door or at the entrance. And we really talked a lot and really tried to think about what we call deep check-ins. So to have the place where you have to do the legal stuff and check someone in and sign your child in is well into the classroom in a way that invites you to walk in. And then there must be somewhere where you can sit as an adult in that classroom. If we want you to hang out and maybe read a book with your child or hang out with us for a little while, you need to be comfortable. And so that's been interesting for us to really try and draw families into the center. You're still always going to get that parent who zips in and zips out, and that's fine. They're getting hopefully what they need. But for those parents who want to linger, or for children who are having a hard time separating, um, yeah, let's just really think about how to be comfortable as an adult in our spaces. Of course, all of these things will be dictated by your own values and your own philosophy. But I think one of the ways that power creeps into our work and where we maybe take power is when we keep families out of our centers, or we have big rules about how families can enter into the space. And I think it's worth thinking about. This is a quote, again, from Teaching to Thinking. And again, if you don't have this book, I really, really, really recommend that you get it. Chapter 7 is all about working, and we're going to be in that chapter quite a bit tonight. But this changed everything for us when Anne said, we moved from talking to families about their children to thinking with families about teaching and learning. We moved from hoping families would be different because of our expert offerings to hoping that we would be different because of our collaboration with families. And again, this shift shifts the power dynamic. We let go of that expert role, and parents get less directive with us as we collaborate together for the benefit of the child. So there's less focus in this ideal on the rules of the center, the policies maybe, and more on what is achievable for optimum care for that child. And so this requires a lot of educators to come to this place where we stop telling parents what we think they should put in their lunch kits or what they should be doing or thinking. And we don't hand out articles because we think they should know about better nutrition or any of those kinds of things, which I am sure we've all experienced. But we want to think with a family about how we can help with the situation. And this has particularly been helpful for inclusion for us, that we aren't talking to families about potentially the things we're seeing that are concerning to us about their child. We're asking them to think with us about supporting the child that, perhaps there are some things going on, but we don't come to it with a heavy-handed expertise. We've done an assessment where think you should call the health nurse. We're calling SCDP. The talking to thinking really changed how we approached our work with families of children with additional support needs. So this leads to this ponder, and again, this is my good friend Anne, who says, and we have this up in the bathroom, at the staff bathroom, in the center I work in, and it is a staggering honor. Families entrust their children to our care, often before they know us. A staggering honor. I don't think in most training institutions or most educators in the busy day to day think about the fact that this child is here with us is a staggering honor. And I think when we do grapple with that, when we do see that every time we go to the bathroom, when we are reminded over and over again, it changes how we view both the child and the family. And I think this is where we sometimes get a bit stuck, is that this is far more than a client relationship, but one that also carries some boundaries and limits. I think we need to acknowledge that this relationship between educators and families is an uncommon relationship of deep vulnerability and trust. We need to treat it as such, with reverence, best practice, grace, empathy, and love. And I recognize there's a lot of feelings about the use of the word love in regards to child care. And how many people you've interviewed and I've interviewed that said, why do you want to work in childcare? And they say, because I love children. And not every child every day, perhaps brings out the most love in us. But I think that we are really trying to reclaim love and care as legitimate modalities within our early childhood practice. And if you are interested, Carol Garbodin Murray, who wrote Illuminating Care, which is another outstanding text on this, wrote a fantastic article called Professional Love, which is widely available. And I will make a note to send that to be posted. But I do think that when a relationship like this, where parents are paying fees, but we're also caring for their most precious person, and we are bringing all our own life into the classroom as well, we're set up for deep richness in terms of relationship, but we're also set up for conflict because unless our aspirations and dreams for this child match the parents, or at least they have some understanding that they may or may not align, we can also get into some difficulties here. And when trust is broken, it is my experience that it is very difficult to rebuild a relationship with a family. And we can do a lot of that work, and we can coach our educators around that kind of work to be able to rebuild the trust. But I've also come to understand that parents have to be willing to do that work too. And that is trickier. And so I've had some very frank conversations with families after, say, an injury where a child has been hurt and they've lost their trust in us and maybe their confidence. and they're making all kinds of demands and putting up all kinds of barriers, which is totally understandable. But I've had to be honest with them about this relationship is built on trust, and we blew it. We apologize. These are the things we have done. These are the things that, we are taking responsibility for, and we will do all of those things. But I also need you to also work to rebuild the trust. And some families readily want to do that, and other families never do. And it ends up being a very contentious relationship thereafter. So meaningful parent involvement, which is what we're trying to talk about, right, is it's rooted in three things: attitudes of mutual respect, warmth, openness, and trust, as we were just saying; knowledge of various models and strategies for ensuring involvement, input, and feedback; and skills of both parents and educators for ensuring effective communication and interpersonal skills. Attitudes, knowledge, skills. We can hope for what parents will bring in terms of these things, but what we can control is our response, our attitudes, our knowledge, and our skills. And as leaders in your centers, the skills and knowledge part often come from you, and the attitudes, either you're hiring fantastically and you don't have a lot of those, or you're managing them so they don't become a job performance issue. So when we're talking about mutual respect, warmth, openness, and trust, that's a big ask of anybody at any time, and particularly with a revolving set of families. Sometimes staff become guarded. They don't want to get too involved. They don't want to get too attached because they know this is just such a transient relationship. And so our expectations around how closely our educators engage with families is up to us. That's up to every center. There's also some cautions if this line is breached. And if suddenly there's a very deep friendship, there's a lot of maybe after work involvement. Those are conversations I've had to have with educators often because it seems so great. And maybe there's a lot of extra work that's offered at night or on weekends. And then when it gets difficult, it makes it so much harder in the center too, right? The knowledge of various models and strategies for ensuring involvement, input, and feedback. I've tried so many of these, and I'm sure you have. We've had, work parties. We've done all the things. We had parents could either give us 5 hours a month of volunteer work, or they could just write us a check. Most families just wrote the check because they didn't want to do the volunteer hours. And after COVID, we just decided we weren't going to go back to that. We didn't think that it was helping us build the kind of community that we wanted. A lot of schools go with that model. And then we really wanted to think about very carefully how we got parent input and feedback that was helpful. And so we started a parent advisory committee, which was separate from our board of directors. So we have 6 sites. So there was 2 parents from each site, which met as a parent advisory committee like 3 times a year. And one of the tasks that the parent advisory committee did was do an annual survey of families, anonymous survey. The only thing parents had to tell us was which center their child was at, because there was a little bit of difference. But we actually did the same survey with exactly the same questions year after year after year so that we could start to see data trends, and we could start to see which issues we had resolved and which issues we still had not yet resolved. We made a huge mistake the first year. We asked about parking right at the beginning of the survey, like, how do you find the parking? Well, nobody finds the parking at any of our centers easy. And at some of our centers, it's a downright gong show. So what happened was everybody was mad right off the bat of the survey, and it was just terrible. So the only change we've ever made was to remove the question about parking, not because I didn't want to hear about it or couldn't hear about it, but because I couldn't do anything about it. And so one of the things we've learned was not to ask questions about things we can't do anything about. And so we also, after a couple of years, we had to put a really strong caveat at the top that this was not the vehicle for personal attacks on any educator, that they could not address in the survey a frustration with an educator unless they had actually gone through the process with the educator or with the manager of that location. Because, it happens, right? Somebody is like an anonymous, I'm going to just say it. We also learned that you hear from the very, very mad and the very, very happy, and you have to discount both and look at where the main data is in the middle because that's more representative of most families. Um, and so it's been a useful tool for us. It has helped us see some ways we just kept getting this question about academics and phonics like year after year. And we're like, how we're so clear about who we are. We're a Reggio inspired, play-based. How are we still getting this question? And then we had to go back and look at what are we giving parents? How are we communicating who we are and what you will or will not see in our centers? And so I think it's been useful. It's been useful. I used to take it a bit too personally, and I've learned to have a thicker skin about that. And then, of course, the skills for both parents and educators for ensuring effective communication. The majority of my staff don't have English as a first language, and so there's lots of ways that like an educator will maybe try to avoid conversations with parents because they don't feel like their English is strong enough. That is a skill we can help with. There are others who are just very introverted or very quiet, and if they've got a really strong parent who's coming at them, they just find their words evaporate. There's lots of ways we've worked really hard on communication skills with our teams. I do find in our field that often people choose this because they're going to be working with children and often have a deficit in their skill set with communicating with adults. And seen as that's, in my experience, more than half the job, it's something that we've had to really work on with our teams. So, what matters most in the establishment and maintenance of a partnership are some of these following things. A genuine commitment to shared decision making, even when staff are capable of making decisions about the child alone. This is a big one. It's like the whole presentation tonight could be on this one. And this is also, we're back to real conversation about power, right? So a genuine commitment to shared decision making, even when the staff are capable of making decisions about the child alone. So let's just take an example here. We're talking about toilet learning. We might decide a child is ready. They're showing all kinds of readiness. They want to get on the toilet. They're really interested in the bathrooming. They're showing all kinds of signs. But readiness at childcare is very different than readiness at home often, and families may not be ready or not be able to be committed to that process at that moment. This is something that we would always make a shared decision before we took any step in regard to anything like that. Naps would be a very similar conversation, right? We might know a 4-year-old who's going off to school is ready to drop their nap. We might not be putting them down. I mean, we could make that decision. Again, we would never make that decision without understanding what this decision would mean for families. The flip is also true. When a family says to us, I don't want my 3-year-old napping anymore because they're a nightmare at home in the evening, we also maybe have to have a conversation about what that looks like for us, right? If the child is falling asleep immediately on laying on their mat, waking up a child and then potential cranky all afternoon, like there's conversations that need to be had. So those are just a couple of examples of this genuine commitment to shared decision making, even though we could make that decision on our own. A willingness to engage in genuine effort to combine our professional expertise and the aspirations of parents for their child, their preferences about their child's experience. This one hit us really hard, and I don't think we'd really sat with parents and asked them deeply what their aspirations and hopes and dreams were for their children in childcare when they were with us. And so we do that. That's our first parent meeting in September now. We create an environment where parents come in and they really think about what is it I want for this next 12 months that my child will be in this program. Like, what are my hopes? What are our hopes and dreams? And then we really lean into those. And we actually have a tree branch in most of our programs, and we hang them off that so that we can be reminded that this child that these parents have hopes and dreams for their children. It isn't just about getting them to eat independently or walk or, be empathetic with their peers or less impulsive. That, yes, of course, we have something to say about good child development. And that doesn't override what parents wish for their children and hope for their children and what they hope their children will experience in our care. Persistent efforts to let parents in on what is happening with their child is in care. The apps changed everything for us with this. Parents getting a notification at their desk, and being able to see that their child, who maybe they left, 20 minutes ago, screaming, upset, who is happily playing now. Those apps have been useful, but the caution with them is that sending a string of cute photos is not documentation. It is not telling the true story of what is happening in terms of the intellectual and pedagogical engagement with their children. And so we have rules around that. You cannot send a photo without some sort of meaningful caption. Systems in place to solicit parents' views, concerns, and criticisms, always knowing that parents are going to be very reluctant to make a criticism of their childcare provider because their fear is it will impact their care for their child. And so if a parent eventually comes forward and makes a complaint, it is quite likely that they are representative of other families because it takes real courage and trust to be able to say what is on your heart if it's something that is difficult. And so this is why maybe an anonymous survey is at least helpful in getting some data back. An open door policy for a manager, you have to decide whether that's how you want to solicit parents' views. Of course, you will always have a squeaky wheel or a very entitled or empowered parent. And we have to be careful about how much time they suck away from some of the other important work that should also continue to happen. Obviously, we're doing continuous evaluation with the aim of continuous improvement. One of the ways we show families that we do this is by having 2 Pro-D closures a year. And we tell them what we're going to be doing and we tell them why it's important. And then we give them feedback about how important this day is. And we thank them for partnering with us so that we can continue to be at the top of our game in service of their children. And then obviously the determination to share with parents all the good news you can about their child without doing that whole good news sandwich thing, because parents are wise to that, right? A good thing, a hard thing, a good thing. They see you coming. And just, again, if we have the honest relationship, if we have that built, then of course we can have the hard conversations. There's lots that we can say about the ways we share at the end of the day. Privacy, all of those things need to be taken into account. And one of the things that has been really important for us is to preserve the environment for the parent and child to have a good reunion. Because what happened in the day, if it was bad, if it was rough, didn't happen between the child and the parent. And they have the right to that warm, engaging delight in seeing each other again, even if we have to talk about that later. If we cut the child off and get to the parent first, or if the child is watchful as we approach their parent, we are somehow interrupting that joyful reunion. And so there's lots of ways around that. You send an email, we have a book with one family it's a really tough go with a little one, and we write. Then the mum, we don't talk at all at the end of the day. She can't cope with it. We don't really have the privacy to do it. She just takes the book home and then she reads it and then she writes her response back and she just puts it in the cubby. And we just read the book backwards and forwards and occasionally have a phone call about it. But there's lots and lots of strategies out there for preserving that moment at the end of the day, which, we all bring stuff to back in our days. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be two working parents and, a couple of kids and life, the world, all of it. And if we can be an easy place to land, we would rather be that than the opposite of that. So, in the day to day, obviously, we've talked about this. Do families see themselves places for them to be part of the program? And not just in a tokenist way. There's always the dad who has a pressure washer and, maybe wants to be involved. But like what does it mean to be, to be involved in their child's program? And again, there's a thousand ways you can do that, and a lot of them are very accessible. But we want to do this in a way that isn't just performative. Time is the greatest barrier in developing relationships with our families. But how do we create those in this very time poor environment that we work in? And so, we create things. I think you've heard me talk about Family Fridays. It's one Friday a month. You stay, we've got your coffee, we've got your baked goods, and you just hang out in the classroom for an extra 10, 15 minutes. We have a pedagogical question. You can engage with it or not engage with it. That's fine. You maybe just want to catch up with your child's bestie's mom and have a quick conversation. Maybe you just want to have 5 seconds to watch your child interact with other children. Maybe you want to have a chat with the staff. Um, you know, when we have parent meetings, we don't have the kids there. And so we meet together with families when we can, and we try and protect that time. Some criticize us, well, what about, families who don't have babysitting or have to pay for a sitter? And we say just one parent could come. If it's a single parent, we might help with some costs, but we also are holding that boundary that this is an important time for the adults in this child's life to have a conversation about what's going on in our classroom. And then obviously opportunities to participate. And there's all of these field trips, special events, parent meetings, governance. So being on the board of directors or on a parent advisory committee, newsletters, work parties, and just fun. We have a couple of events that are just fun. They really have no purpose other than we have Family Fun Day in the summer. We rent a big campground and we put on we actually just throw a ton of huge, big bouncy balls, soccer balls, frisbees, just a lot of active stuff. It's a fully fenced campground. We bring a magician in. He does a ridiculous show every year when everybody screams with laughter. And we put on a barbecue with like just burgers and hot dogs and a bag of chips. And families just come and hang out. And it is oversubscribed every year. Families love it. I can never get anybody to leave. And, it happens pretty much without staff. There's a few of me and my manager standing around, making sure everything's working, but families engage with families, children play with children. It's a community building event. And then we do the same in the winter, but at the arena. We have a family skate night. And again, we pay for everything, so there's no financial barrier for anyone to come. And so we just rent the arena for a couple hours and families come and we get some hot chocolate from Tim Hortons and some cookies. And families love it to death. They just love going with all their friends to skate for a couple hours. I don't skate, I just hand out hot chocolate. Um, So I wanted to talk for a second about, and I'm going to post this article. Jim Greenman is sadly no longer with us, but he wrote an article many years ago called Places for Childhoods Include Parents Too. And he wrote it as both a center director and a parent himself. which I think is why it resonates with me in my heart because I was also both of those things. But he writes this fantastic article, which I will have Michelle post. And it's really worth your read because I think you will understand it very well. He talks a lot about the way we characterize parents as them. You know, they do this, they don't label the socks, they don't send good lunches, they don't read the newsletter. And we can sometimes demonize parents based on the behavior of the worst parents, right? Who are just doing the things. And he says, you know, I, as a director, made the policy that everybody should label everything, whilst I myself practically never labeled anything because I was too busy. And don't people understand that it's a lot of work? So in this article, it ends with this. He suggests this mutual approach called the why not approach. So this is what he says. One way to characterize the approach is that all requests are met with a non-defensive attitude and why not thinking. An approach, so when parents ask for a change in their child's routine or a special activity or a different way of doing things, we genuinely, and I think that's the key word, ask ourselves, why not? This is different than the customer is always right approach. It's not an automatic yes. There may be legitimate why nots that lead to a no for budget reasons, complexity, we don't know how to do it, staffing. But we have no reason to be defensive about our givens that lead to our limitations. The outcome of a why not approach is not unmanageable complexity, but thoughtful care, increased trust that we are professionals who are thinking about good care. The non-defensive why not rubs off on parents and begins to characterize staff relationships as well. Equally important, the why not approach leads to innovative and better care. So, an example of this for us was a parent who came in and said they would like their child to use cloth diapers. I would say in most programs, like that's just a flat out no. Like we don't like no, like we don't have time for that. But we asked why not, and then we realized that maybe we were making some assumptions about cloth diapers. And maybe they were based on when our children were little, and maybe things had changed. So we asked the family if we could trial it. We weren't sure that this would work for us, but we'd like to try. And what would that take? And they said, we will bring everything. It will be no work for you. We will bring it in. You will bundle the thing, put it in, and we will remove everything home. Like this will not be any more difficult than a regular diaper. So we were like, great. So we did, and we did it, and we have always been able since then to accommodate a family's desire to have cloth diapers. So, you know, I think the point is well made, right? If we just say, if we just pause and say, that's interesting. I'm going to have to think about that. Let me chat to the team and I'll get back to you. I think when we can create that space, even if we know in our gut that's probably not going to work. So a family says, my child's toilet training, I'd like you to give them 3 M&Ms every time they go to the bathroom successfully. Okay, like I can tell you right off the bat, that's not going to happen because of a million reasons. But if I just said, that's an interesting approach. Let me chat to the team and I'll get back to you. And then when I have to come back and say, we had a good conversation about this. We totally see where you're coming from. And what we'd like to do is we're not able to do, the candy here. And, we're not going to sort of engage in that bribery. But we will keep the information for you so that you can then decide what you do with that information at the end of the day. So if there's been 3 successful peas in the party, then you can meet out the M&Ms at home. So we're not dissing them. We're not downplaying our side. We're holding to our values, but we're also creating a bit of space where we can work together. We have found it useful. So a couple more musings as I'm watching the time. This is all from Teaching to Thinking, chapter 7. But I really think these are three. I read the chapter again like three times in preparing for tonight, but these are three things I think we should talk about. Borders, that is, borders between educators and families, begin to dissolve when we consciously shift our ways of thinking about parents, focusing not on their stressors and failings, but on their strengths, the emotional and psychic resources that parents offer, their tenderness, full-heartedness, and complexity. I think very often we make parents into two-dimensional characters instead of understanding the fullness of who they are. And it has impoverished our programs when we have done that, because who knows what they could bring to our programs? Who knows what we could learn from them if we entered into this kind of partnership with families? From participation to partnership, from border to alliances. If we really see ourselves as a team working together in service of this child, then we become more equal, we become more focused, and we become more empathetic. Believing that parents are a source of our learning, our identity, and our knowledge, and acting on that belief opens an important door to the joy of being together. And that's a very tall order. On the day-to-day in childcare, with the time barriers that are a fact. But I do think when we've pushed through, when we have not allowed those concerns to dictate our behavior, we have seen massive, massive payoff in engagement and connection with families. For many, many years, we didn't do parent meetings. We didn't do these small group when something is happening in a classroom. We didn't gather the families together to talk about what was unfolding pedagogically in the classroom. As Hilltop has done in Seattle, which we had visited many times, we thought what they did was amazing, but we really just didn't think our parents wanted to do that because we were scared to do that. We were afraid of what that might mean if we actually say to parents, here's the documentation. This is what's been happening in our classroom. What do you think about that? What can you bring to this conversation that maybe we aren't seeing? Maybe there's something going on that is the reason the children in this group are doing this particular thing. And I remember asking their director, like, how do you get families to come? And she said, we just make it so appealing. And so we make it as part of being part of this community means you show up to these things. You just be really clear about that. And honestly, we prevaricated for so many years and eventually we did it. And now it is one of the richest things that we do in our organization. Parents come so ready to engage in what is happening with their children. We always have an activity for them to do. And they leave something in the classroom for the children to engage with the next day. And it has been powerful. What we have learned, what they have learned, there have been tears, there have been hugs, there have been arguments, there have been incredible revelations when we bring these parents together. And, you know, sometimes the group is 4 or 5, sometimes it's 15, but we've stopped fussing about the number and started recognizing that who comes needs to come and be there, and we'll let the rest go. And some of the most powerful moments have been when the group is small, when someone can really use their voice and be vulnerable and actually say what they need to say. And these incredible relationships start to develop between families. And that is strengthening our community far beyond childcare. Our HR admin director who sits beside me in my office was a parent of ours. Her son is 23, and they are still best friends with the families that their children all went to childcare together. They still go away together. Those moms are still all best friends. The impact of building these partnerships and relationships, and it's expanding out into our community can be so profound. And I think it is something that we should really hold on to as so important and help our educators understand that we're part of a community, we're part of the fabric of society, and we can do our part to help people connect. I'm in a very high immigrant population city where most people came from somewhere else. And so often they've had to leave their extended family and friends behind. And sometimes the childcare becomes the place where they make absolutely critical connections with other newcomers and with people who have been here longer who can help them navigate. There is such an important and amazing joy that comes from being together, but there is so much work that has to go into making that happen. This is a repeat slide from last time. I wanted to be really honest because I think that this has to be said again, that policies and practices and pedagogy should build relationships, not spark conflict, right? So when we make a policy, we have to think through all the ramifications of it and be ready to defend it, which is why if it's based on our values, that will be easier. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination, my many hours with angry parents would tell you, not everyone's going to be happy. But if we are making the decisions based on best practice, based on values, and we've thought it through from the perspective of families, we've asked families, even before we've implemented, there will still be some people who aren't happy. It's not our job to make everyone happy. Our job is to do our best work. We need to make sure that policies are a tool to guide our life together as a community, not as a hammer to ensure compliance. Whenever a manager of mine brings down the hammer out of total frustration or for whatever good reason, and it always leads to conflict. No parent goes, fine, okay, you win, then walks away. It just doesn't happen. It leads to hurt feelings. It leads to the breaking down of trust. It feeds into that power dynamic. Clarity and policy leads to compliance and community harmony. We've tried now, we did a standard of practice on celebrations, which I think I've referenced before. Parents unhappy, very unhappy with us, mainly because we said no more goodie bags, very upset. So, and we had actually taken it to some parents through the board of directors, and they hadn't actually flagged any of the issues that ended up coming up from families. So we just started a new standard of practice. And this time we have invited parents to be part of the process of reviewing the document as it is developed. So again, live and learn, right? But it'll be curious to me if that kind of engagement with families around policy as it's in development, how it goes, first of all. Are they going to be collaborative? Is there going to be a power dynamic there? How will we handle that well? And then will it lead to less pushback when the policy drops? Stay tuned. And then always leaving space for change. We had a lot of parents really unhappy with some of the things we did around celebrations. And we've come to say, look, we will review these standards of practice annually, and your feedback will be taken into account. So we chose a particular holiday. There was some people who felt that was, in conflict with something else we had said. It could be, right? It could be, and we might have to revise that. But that's why we always leave space for change. And to finish, I have a quote to end, but just to say this again, as a leader, you have many eyes and ears on you, and you must hold yourself to a high ethical standard as you interact with parents. We cannot gossip about them with staff. I know sometimes we need to vent, and sometimes staff need to vent about an interaction, a frustration, the nth time this parent has put peanuts in the lunch or forgotten the bedding or whatever transgression they have done. I get that, but I think especially leaders have to hold a really strong ethical boundary around the way we talk about families. And I've seen some managers or leaders try to sort of be buddy buddy with their staff. And one of the ways they do that is to side with them around this cranky parent instead of holding a perspective that this parent isn't wrong for asking. They're trying to ensure something for their child. How they asked might have been out of line, and that you as a manager might take that on. But I think we've really got to watch this gossip train. Having boundaries about the time, place, and tone of communication is good and fair for everyone. Obviously, being harassed is not acceptable. And we have a very strong policy that parents cannot harass our staff or each other, as it turns out, in the parking lot after. We live life alongside families, sharing the ups and downs, ours and theirs, and fostering a relationship that primarily serves the child and secondarily serves the family too. So, boundaries and conflict and biases are best managed when values aligned. If you have a staff who has super strong opinions about certain things, and just can't toe the line with your policies and your values, then that's a conversation that has to be had. So, to end, this is a famous Reggio quote. A child enters our school, our center, with a story, a life in her family. If we keep the child at the center of our work, we must consider her family, or we have an incomplete child. As always, the resources that I spoke about tonight will be posted on the website by Michelle, and I'm going to stop the recording, but if anybody wants to chat, and for those of your colleagues who didn't attend tonight, this recording will be available. Otherwise, good night and enjoy the sunshine.